So, a new JavaScript framework is in town, which is called SolidStart. Now, we all know that one framework is not enough. So, SolidStart is actually a meta framework, which is just one framework on top of another. So, SolidStart builds on top of the Solid framework, SolidJS. So, in this video, I'm just going to take a look at SolidStart, and I actually don't know SolidStart. I have never used it. I have also never used SolidJS, but I have used NextJS. So I just want to see how SolidStart works. Now, this is not a tutorial. This is more of like an exploration where I just go in and explore the framework. Let me know if you want to see more of this kind of videos, because I mean, usually in tutorials, the video creator actually knows what they're doing, but here I have no idea. So you and I, we are same. We are just going in blind. Now, so what exactly is SolidStart? As I said, it's built on top of SolidJS, and it's actually in beta, experimental stage. I have seen a little bit of it, and I feel like it's very similar to NextJS. So what this does is that I'm just going to read here. So as you can see, web applications usually have like databases, servers, front ends, data fetching, caching, etc. So SolidStart combines most of these out of the box and integrates them together. So basically you have your front end UI and you have your server logic both at the same place. So one part of it runs on the server, another part of it runs on the browser, and they integrate seamlessly, so you don't have to worry about like making API requests, handling responses, etc, etc. So SolidStart enables you to render your application in different way. You have client side rendering, server side rendering, streaming SSR, and static site generation. If you have used NextJS, you are probably familiar with it. I mean, all of them, I believe. So basically, I believe streaming SSR is same as the incremental static regeneration in NextJS. So client-side rendering is basically just you load the page on the browser and then make API requests from the browser to load the rest of the data. So server-side rendering is just you render the page on the server when a request is made and pass it on to the browser. Static site regeneration, not regeneration, just generation, is basically you generate the pages ahead of the time, like during compilation or when you are building your project. So the difference between static site generation and server side rendering is that static site generation, you create all the pages like when you are building the project. All your pages are ready. When the browser makes a request, you just pass the ready-made pages. Whereas in server-side rendering, you generate the pages when a request is made on the fly. So let's dive into it and see how it works. So here I see some interesting features, like you have fine-grained reactivity. So it basically builds on the reactivity provided by SolidJS, which I think is very similar to React. I have no idea. An interesting thing I can see, isomorphic routing. So basically your routes look the same whether it's running on client or the server, which is basically good. Multiple rendering modes, as I said, right? You have a command line interface like NextJS and deployment adapters. So basically you can deploy to your favorite platform like out of the box, I believe. So let's start. So you need to run this command. Let me run it. So I'll create a folder. Oops. npm init solid. Okay, which template do you want to use? I'm just going to go with the bare one. Server-side rendering, yeah, let's see. TypeScript, yes. Alright, so I have to run. Okay, first close it with Ctrl+C, then npm install. Alright, let's open it up. Yes, I trust the authors. So this structure is very similar to NextJS, except you have pages. So you have a router folder. I believe this is what corresponds to the pages folder in the NextJS. So you define your routes inside this src routes folder. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So you have a root.tsx file, which I believe is the root of the client side stuff. Also a corresponding root.css. So here I can see entry server and entry client. I believe these two are the entry points for the server and the client. So the client basically mounts the entry point, I believe, to the document. I think it's similar to React. And entry server, I believe, starts the server somehow. Something, this start server component does something that probably starts the server. So here I can see components. So components seems very similar to React components, and I believe components in SolidJS, I mean in SolidStart, components are basically the same as components in SolidJS, which are basically like these Pascal cased functions which return this JSX. So one thing I can see different is that this creates signal. I don't know what this means. In React we use useState, so it's probably similar to like that. We'll see. And I believe this routes folder stores the routes, and they are basically similar to Next.js. So basically index gets mapped to the root path. You have this bracket syntax to create dynamic segments, and this triple dot to create a catch-all route. Okay, let's get back to the doc. Before we do that, what I'm going to do is let us start creating our app. So basically we'll just try to build a simple sort of CMS. Maybe we'll have a few users, a few posts, maybe a few comments. I don't want to deal with databases, so I'm just going to create a static file. So I'm going to create a new folder called data, and here I'm going to create an index.txt, and I'm going to write the data here. So here I have three variables, basically three arrays. One is the user of array of users, array of posts, and array of comments. Basically very simple structure. So users, you have like ID, username, name, location, etc. Post, you have ID and user ID, which connects posts to users, and comment, you have post ID and user ID, which is very obvious. So we are just going to use this in place of our database, and let's see how it works. Let me go to the documentation and see what happened. So as I said, root.txt is the HTML root of your application, both for client and server rendering. So let's open this up and see what is there. So you have your basic HTML structure, and I believe this file routes is what loads the file or loads the routes. There is actually start and see what happens. So I'll run npm run dev, and it opens. Okay, so here I can see index and about. So this loads the 404 page because we don't have it defined. So index loads, I believe, the counter component. So how is this mapping done? This route gets mapped to this file. You have routes/index.tsx, which loads this counter component. Yeah, right. So let us create a route called, let's say, users, and I believe this structure is same as NextJS, so it should be good. So let us create a folder called users and a file called index.tsx. I can't pronounce. So this should get mapped to /users. So let's see what happens if I now visit /users. Page not found, obviously, because I haven't defined it. So let's define it. So export default function users. So I return. Do I have to return it? Yeah, definitely. So main. Let's create a div and write hello world and reload it. Yep. If I go to the doc, let's see. Here we have API routes. So API routes are just like any other route and follow the same file name convention. The only difference is what you should export from the file. So instead of a component, instead of exporting a default component and a route data function, so I actually have no idea what route data is. We'll see. So API routes export functions that are named after the HTTP method. So basically you can export functions like get, post, patch, delete, etc. And these functions can also sit in your UI routes beside your components, so they can handle non-get HTTP requests. Okay, right. And what exactly is this route data function? It's probably defined here. Do you have route data? Yeah. Okay. So with route data function we can instead start fetching the data parallel to loading the route. So I think if you define the route data function, it will load the data as soon as your request is made, so basically in parallel, so that you don't have to wait for the data to load after rendering the page. So let me create API folder, and let's see how we can define an user's API. So I'm just going to create another folder called users and index.tsx. Oops. So I can export a function called get, and let us just return the users. So I have to use new response. Okay, so I believe I can send a JSON here. Let me load users. let's see how it works. Where did it go? Is there an error? Anyway, API/users. Okay, it works. Unfortunately, it's not JSON, so I'll have to convert it to JSON. It should work. Yeah. Okay, so this gives me a lot of ideas, and I believe if I try to make a post request here, it will give me an error. So let's try making a route that takes the ID of a user and returns the data. So let us create a file. Nope. So here this square bracket syntax denotes dynamic route. So basically here your user ID will be passed as a dynamic segment, and this will be captured in the ID variable, and I just have to see how I can access the ID variable. Okay, so I just found that I can actually use this JSON function to return the data. So let me just quickly go here and replace this with JSON users, and it should still work the same. Yeah, now it's actually a JSON and not a JSON string just. Okay, so I can see here I have to use this useParams function to get access to the parameters. So let's go here and start writing it. So I will export a get function as before, and I will need access to ID. Okay, and I'll have to find the user with an ID from the users array. So this should be easy to do. I can just use the find method, users dot find. So I will take an user and check if their ID is equal to the ID or not. So as you can see, this side is a number and this is the string. So let's convert this to string and check. Okay, so this should find the user with the specified ID, and if the user doesn't exist, I can send a response. I'll have to see how to set the status if I am using the JSON function. So I can probably write JSON and error not found. Can I set the status? Nope. So I think I can pass the status here, I believe. Okay, and if the user is found, then I will return a JSON. What damn it. So let's see if it works. So I will see if I can get the user with the ID 1, and we can't. Okay, so after a little bit of digging, I found out that useParams can only be used in UI and not on API routes. So to do this in API routes, you have to add a parameter to the function that you are defining, and it is of type API event, and you can get the params object of it. So much for isomorphic routes. So basically this contains the params, and now you can use ID from it. Now if I reload, beautiful. And if I try to load a user that doesn't exist, I should get an error. Did it actually set the data? So set the status? I have no idea. Anyway, now let's try to load this thing inside the UI. So here I want to show the list of all the users. So what I will do is try to make an API call to this route /API/users, and try to see if I can do that or not. So if I understand currently, I have to export a route data function, right? So here it is, this route data function, which should load the data. And if I come here, I'll see that I have to wrap this thing in a create resources. So basically create resources will call your API or whatever, and I am not sure what is the point of wrapping this in create resources. And then you have another way to do it using create route data, which gets rid of the create resources stuff. So I believe the create resource takes an async function, returns a signal from it. Alright, so what exactly is signal? Now I think it's time to see it. Okay, so basically if I understand correctly, signals, they track a single value which can change throughout your application lifecycle. So basically it changes over time, and when the value changes, the signal also gets changed. So sort of like a reactive dependency type of sort. I believe this is same as React states. Like if you do use state, and you can change the state of it, and anything that depends on it will also change. So it's similar. So basically this creates a signal. So students is a signal. So if the value of students changes, it will re-render the UI, I believe. So here we have a little bit more information about the route data function. So it is only called once per route, and when the first time the user visits the route, it is called. And then I believe the fine-grained resources that remain alive synchronize with states/URL changes to refresh data when needed. I have no idea what it means, but I can probably guess. This function is called before the route is rendered. Okay. It will be called both on the server and the client. Okay. Yeah, I think it's enough. So we thought create resource was too low level for most people need, and did not use the knowledge the browser had. So we created create route data. Okay. Yeah, so we have to wrap this call inside a create route data, and we can use route data to get access to the stuff in the UI. Okay. So let's see if I can do this. So I'll export a function called route data. I believe it doesn't take any arguments. Yeah. And I will return create route data to wrap an async function and load the data. So I will call the API /API/users This should give me an array of users. And I will respond. I will call the JSON function to return it as JSON. Good. And here I believe I can call it and get the data by using useRouteData. How was it called? So I need to pass a type. Okay, so type of route data. Yeah, I believe it's to satisfy TypeScript. You need to pass the type, so whatever it returns. So here I am returning any. You will probably have a type here. Okay, so I can probably use it. I will create a loop. So the syntax is for with a capital F. For each students yeah, I think I can only return one root element, so I'll put this inside main. This is actually a function, so I have to call this, and I will write their name. No, this should be a function, so it will take one student and I will just return its name. Why am I calling it student? Oh god, I'm just following the docs and forgetting that it's actually users. God damn it. So I'll change it to users, and this will be user, and I will put their name. This better work. Oops. Okay, so I think we need to use the absolute URL, I believe. So localhost, is this running on 300,000? Yes. Nope, I need to wrap this in parentheses. So as you can see, we have a problem here. So I'm just going to forcefully cast it. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, that's actually nice. Okay, let's now see how we can navigate to other pages. So I found this use navigate function. So I believe I can call this to get a function that I can call with a route which should navigate it. Let's try to see. Let me add a button. No, inside the main. So a button on click. Let's call it go to home. Go to home. Let's define this function. Oh no, I can define it inside here. So navigate is use navigate, and go to home is, I just call navigate with the name of the route. Does this work? And it doesn't. Okay, so I found out why it doesn't. So it has a resolve option which defaults to true, so it resolves the path against the current route, which means it's relative to the current route. So when I write slash, it actually means users slash. So if I want to go to the actual route, I have to pass resolve to be false. I think so. Let's see. If I now press it, yep, beautiful. Okay, so one last thing that I want to test is the server dollar thing. So what it does is it takes a function that should only run on the server and it converts it into an RPC call. That's actually pretty great. Let's see if I can do this. So I will define a function here. So let's see. Log on server, which is server dollar. So it takes one function here and console.log from the server. Okay, and I can call it probably here. Does that work? I have to go to the users route. Yeah, so as you can see, it calls it multiple times. So I believe it after loading the data, it re-renders the UI, so that's why there's a second time, and it makes a post request to this thing. Yeah, I believe this is what the RPC call, or this is what happens to the RPC call. Yeah, it's actually pretty good, and I think we have actually explored enough. Not enough, obviously there's a lot more to explore, but I think this actually gives me a good idea about how it looks. We obviously did not use these posts and comments. Maybe we can do it in a later video. Anyway, if you want to see more of this sort of blind exploration videos, let me know in the comments. If you have any feedbacks, feel free to leave a comment. If you like the video, give it a like, and if you want, you can also subscribe. No, actually, do subscribe. Bye bye.